Strobo! Strobo! Strobo!
Gabbo! Gabbo! Gabbo!
Yes, Strobo, not Gabbo. Strobo, the Masters of the Universe character. We all know Strobo, right? Okay, well, some of us don't know him, and I've got a confession at the end of this video about knowing about him. But who is Strobo? Well, for starters, he's a Masters of the Universe Classics figure that was released in 2013, and he was one of 3 non-subscription figures. In particular, he was released at New York Comic Con. And while not everyone was familiar with Strobo, he does have a fan following. In fact, he's one of those characters that fans have been making customs of for years, not just because he's a simple custom from reuse of parts, but he has a very interesting connection to MOTUC brand history and where the brand was going. So looking at him visually, as I noted about the shared parts, yes, it's pretty obvious that he uses parts from other figures, particularly Cyclone there. And while he was never released in the vintage line, and no, your eyes aren't fooling you, these are just really good fan customs, he did have some plans in the vintage line. Namely, in 1987, some figures were planned by Mattel that were kit bashes, essentially using existing parts from different characters, different figures that had already been released, in order to quickly get more characters to market. And one of those characters was Strobo. So he did have some artwork designed by Mattel in black and white, along with other characters that actually eventually were released in the Classics line at PowerCon by Super 7. So after Mattel stopped making classics and Super 7 thankfully picked up the ball, the characters that were planned for the 1987 line were incorporated and created for the first time in color and given actual names by the fine folks at PowerCon and Super 7. But that's a video for another time. While these characters came out in 3-packs, well, if you count both of the Snake Horde Troopers as 2 characters, which you should, it's a 3-pack, the one character that was released in Classics by Mattel from this planned 1987 line that never happened was Strobo, a character whose power was shining light on people from his chest. Hey, you know, with a toy line with characters like Ram Man, Manny Faces, and Clawful, what do you expect? Now, as noted, not just shared parts, but he uses the actual head of Zodak. So it's pretty obvious that this character was going to be inserted into the line simply because he was easy to create. Again, using Cyclone's body, put with Zodak's head, and the standard human arms. All right, so, well, actually he had Cyclone's arms too, with the little rings. Rings are cool now. All right, so yeah, in MOTUC Classics, he became a part of the Cosmic Enforcers, fighting for neutrality.
What makes a man turn neutral? Lust for gold?
But he did have a longer history in the vintage line than any of those other black and white 1987 concept characters that, like Strobo, would be considered kit bashes, where you're not developing new parts, but rather putting parts from different characters together to make a new character. So Strobo appeared in just one other source, which was a Masters of the Universe magazine issue, which really I should do a whole video on the MOTUC magazines. They're pretty incredible and have some amazing cover art. So Strobo made an appearance, and it was about a battle between He-Man and Skeletor, shockingly, where they were after a piece of a cosmic asteroid called the Dark Star. And, He-Man learned his lesson that he can't blast Strobo because, light reflects from his reflector. And the character that wound up in the magazine, of course, was because he was being planned for the line with heavy reuse parts. And while he never made it into the line in 1987, he made it into the Classics line because that's kind of what Classics was all about, was picking up the pieces. And because he used shared parts, or as he was planned to use shared parts, it made him that just as easy to incorporate into the Classics line because we could use the same shared parts. We had Cyclone's chest, we had the arms, we had Cyclone's gloves, and we had Zodak's head. So put it all together and bam, there's your Strobo. Now, because he used so many shared parts, we wanted to kind of load him up with extra accessories to try to make him special, that he wasn't just going to look like a cheap repaint. Of course, he did have that brand new cape, which in the vintage line would have just been made of cloth, kind of like Randor's and Scareglows. One of the accessories he came with was an alternate head, but not a head for him. This was a maskless head for Zodak, Zodak with a K, the black character from the 2000X series that was a Mystic Enforcer versus a Cosmic Enforcer, but is still linked to the Cosmic Enforcers. Now, I actually had a little bit of trouble getting that head approved because, well, one of the things engineering is tasked with from a job perspective is bringing the figures in at the lowest possible cost. And they really pushed back saying, well, why are we having a head for a character that's not even related to this? I'd been trying to get a Zodak maskless head out since day one when we first did Zodak. So I basically told engineering that they were best friends and they hung out together. And they're like, okay, I guess that makes sense. And I breathed a big sigh of relief. The Dark Star fragment was easier to get through because we could show that it was from the comic book, but the pushback from engineering to bring the cost down meant that something had to be cut, and I really didn't want to cut Zodak's head. So the laser gun that was planned to go with him wound up on the cutting room floor, but we had showed the gun at, I believe, San Diego Comic-Con. And I'm a firm believer that if you show something to fans, you need to release it. That's why we really didn't show more than the first few figures for the subscription because we knew the rest of the year was still in flux. So this gun, being one of those items that was still in flux, got shown. But luckily, because we had those weapon packs in the line, we were able to finally get it out. So combining it with some other cool items like Rattler's armor and cowl, it became a newly tooled item in one of the cooler of the weapons packs, probably one of the best weapon packs that we did. And we finally had Strobo's gun, and you could arm him up and have his Dark Star and go to town because, now he was ready for battle. And Zodak's head was included, which when engineering found out it was for a different figure and a figure we'd already done that had glow-in-the-dark tattoos, they even said, oh, I wish you told us that. We would have made the paint on his face glow in the dark. I'm like, you were trying to cut the head! But that's a whole other story. Well, I just told that story. So with classics bringing Strobo back into the mainstream, or as mainstream as we are with fans of Masters of the Universe, he did make another appearance in the modern comic books that Tim Seeley drew, along with a cool Deadpool purple character and the other Cosmic Enforcers. So, Strobo lives, not just in new comic books, but he's tended to be a fan favorite based on all of the customs made over the years, even, fans thinking what he might have looked like under the mask. And it was really cool to get him into the line in this sense, because that's what Masters of the Universe Classics was about, was scouring the entire universe of He-Man and bringing the best of the best into plastic and having a complete line. All right, with that, I have a huge confession to make. When it comes to Strobo, I wasn't really aware of him, at least until I started working on the line. Now, obviously, he had his fans, based on the fact that there's custom figures and artwork, and he did appear in the Masters of the Universe magazine. The artwork from 1987 was a little bit more obscure, unless you were on like He-Man.org or one of the fan sites. And I get that I was kind of the face of the brand, not just behind the scenes, but often in front of them, speaking to fans at conventions and talking about the brand and, trying to sell it in and, all of that stuff. So, yeah, it's definitely a little embarrassing that I had never heard of him, and in all the research that I did on the brand in order to write the bios and the mini-comics, well, really first the bios, then the mini-comics came later, I never came across him. And when fans started asking about Strobo, I even said, wait, who? Strobo? Like, what? I was deep in the Mattel archive trying to pull everything I could on He-Man and Masters of the Universe in order to have the most complete line possible and a storyline in the bios that justified that. I even typed by hand every single one of the 1987 licensor guide kits so that we had something to start the bios with, because in a lot of cases, this was the only bio that existed. And I uncovered a lot of cool stuff, like Don Glut's original Fighting Foeman draft of the original storyline. But, yeah, when it came to Strobo and putting him in the line, this was something that fans were talking about online, and my ears perked up, and I was like, wait a minute, Strobo? Who is that character? Because, yeah, I will absolutely confess, when it came to him,
I have no idea who this is.